Welcome back. Now, according to the latest SABRIC figures, SIMswap incidents increased by 91% in the last year when looking at digital banking fraud across all platforms. In his latest article titled Industry Inertia Keeping SIMswap Fraud Alive, Naicker, product owner of Entersekt, explores how we could lower our risk with this perennial and costly threat. And he joins us now to tell us more about his findings. So good morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning, Lebo. Thanks for having me, and morning to your viewers.
I want to talk about SIMswap fraud. What is it? What are we talking about here?
So SIMswap fraud is, firstly, SIMswap fraud is kind of a subset of SIMswap, and SIMswap is legitimate. However, fraudsters have found a way to impersonate account holders, get their mobile number basically, and intercept communication. So we found that, again, there's a fraud leg tied to a legitimate purpose, and then ultimately fraudsters being, after the money, chasing and trying to get account holder details and conduct SIMswap fraud. So yeah, lots of numbers and 91% increase, as you mentioned.
Phew, I'm looking at that. I mean, what do we know about the inner workings of SIMswap fraud?
Yeah, so in terms of the modus operandi from our fraudsters, there's a strong leg around social engineering. So it's firstly obtaining as much personal information that you can about a potential victim, using that information and then basically contacting a mobile network provider, impersonating the victim and conducting a SIM swap. So then as soon as the fraudster has a hold of the mobile number, they can intercept communication, receive SMS OTPs, and use that then to log into banking details, your banking account, and conduct fraudulent behavior.
Now, you say that fraud is still largely manual with social engineering right at the heart of the attacks. Tell us more about that.
Right. So in terms of social engineering, it's about how can a fraudster get as much personal information or any sort of information from the victim, and manual in the sense of whether you're receiving a link via an SMS, so it's phishing in the form of an SMS, email, or even a voice call where a fraudster would impersonate, for example, a banking official and say, hey, can I have these details just to confirm that? And in actual fact, they're using that as a case to then phone a mobile network provider and conduct a SIM swap. And these are just vectors in order to get that personal information to start it off with. So again, we've seen seismic shifts in technology. However, the SIM, which is what this is based on, we haven't seen that much. The last SIM we had is in your device right now was brought in 2012.
And why do you think that is, that the SIM has remained fairly unchanged?
Yeah, so again, we've brought in additional technology in terms of mobile applications and seen, artificial intelligence. However, in terms of the actual SIM card in your device, there hasn't been much change or focus on that because it's just been a case of let's look at adoption. We've got a majority. In fact, in terms of SIM cards, there's around 8 billion in circulation right now. So it's just the enormity and scale of it that has made it a bit hard to kind of suppress and change over time, but it's not a negotiable anymore.
And is the industry willing to change? It's one thing to say we need to change it, but what is the response from the industry to say, are they willing to go the extra mile to say we need to be moving away from these, from SIM cards?
Yeah, and that's the thing. So it does require a multi-layered approach from the mobile network operators. It requires an approach from financial institutions or other organizations who have historically implemented SMS OTPs in the past to look at ways in terms of upfront trying to reduce the risk. And it's that approach that's going to make a seismic or significant change. But it does, even in some instances, and we've seen that in the United States, require regulatory intervention, which is what they're looking at. So to put in tighter restrictions or tighter guidelines, rather, around SIM swap and how that takes place in terms of United States. But we need to look at ways of implementing that in South Africa.
Now, we're trying to reduce or stop SIMswap fraud. Where do we start? Because we have to work with what we have at the moment. Technology is not moving fast enough to move in the other direction. But how do we work with what we have at the moment?
Yeah, so there's various players in this ecosystem, right? You have the innocent victim, you have the mobile network operators who have talked to already to say, let's look at tightening our processes. How does SIMswap take place right now? How do we identify between legitimate and fraudulent instances? How do we look at reducing the use of SMS OTPs, augmenting that with additional forms of authentication? You've seen mobile apps. How can we use that? How can we use in-app authentication? And just bring in additional forms that are much more secure than using SMS OTP. And then from the end customer, there's various ways in which you can keep your guard up to not share personal information on social media, to keep an eye out on your phone, because that's one of the triggers. When you lose connectivity, something's happening on your mobile device. You got to be more aware around it. So vigilance is pretty important, but it does require a multi-layered approach from all the parties in this broad ecosystem.
Now, you also say that consumers should treat any request for confidential info with great skepticism. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so again, in terms of whether you're receiving a phone call from a banking representative, or whether you're getting an SMS, or it's a great deal that's just come off the back of Black Friday, and you need to click on the link, we need to treat all of these messages and all of these requests for personal information or for trying to get a great deal with caution. We need to, in terms of if we're getting any sort of phone calls from a banking representative, we need to vet this by checking in with the bank. If we're getting alerts on our mobile device, we need to be more aware about this, and we need to treat those requests with caution, because again, in terms of social engineering, fraudsters are looking at getting as much personal information as they can so they can ultimately impersonate you to conduct a SIMswap.
And how do you know who to trust? I think that's where the difficulty for most of us consumers is that, you'd be buying online and then they send you that, I don't know if you've seen it, where the page, I think it says pay fast, and then you put in your cell phone number, they send you the OTP, and then you can continue with the purchase. For those of us that can continue working with something like pay fast, then you know that, you can continue with it. But for somebody new who are very apprehensive about online shopping and, the SIM card and the whole process, who do we trust?
Yeah, that's a great question. And in terms of trust, you have existing relationships that you're well aware of, and activity and behavior, right? So where you've been shopping, which sites you stay away from, and I think it's also being aware of the types of phone calls you're getting, because one of the uses that a fraudster would try to approach is try to spam you, try to phone you so often that you want to switch your phone off. But we need to just be aware around where our profiles are used, which sites do we get on, and which behaviors. So for example, if someone's buying something on your behalf, and you get a notification, you need to immediately contact your bank. You need to immediately raise that with your mobile network provider that, hey, something's going on that is out of my control. So it's important to have those numbers on hand, whether it's your mobile network provider or even your banking institution, so that they can step in and they can also assist you with this process, because it can be quite flustering as well.
And then just before I let you go, how does banks also play their role in it? Because I know with my bank specifically, one of the things that they do is that they'll say to you, remember that as the bank, we would never call you to ask you for your OTP, for instance. How do banks also play a bigger role in ensuring that, people like that message for me will stand out, but for Magogo somewhere in Kleprefir wouldn't know? Do you know what I mean? How do banks make it a bit tougher for fraudsters to get access to their accounts?
Yeah, so in this multi-layered approach, banking institutions need to also try their best to educate customers, reiterate the message, and in various forms. If we're looking at, educating customers in person where they can, if it's down at a branch in an engagement, or if it's on a phone call or an SMS, but constantly reiterating this message to say, we wouldn't request for this information on a phone call. And also, even before it gets to that point, let's try as a banking association or institutions to limit this by flagging certain behaviors, by being able to identify risk before it gets to a point of fraud taking place. So there's various mechanisms, and I guess that's why, working with fintechs such as Entersekt, where we've got this myriad of experience in bringing in technology to flag or pick up on fraudulent behavior before it gets to the point of actually fraud taking place. And that's where even fintechs play a major part in this ecosystem.
All right. Entersekt CEO, product owner of Entersekt, Naicker, thank you so much for that information that we needed. We've been discussing the rise in SIMswap fraud as well as what can be done to curb the scourge.